Therapy delivery.
Oh, thank God it came.
Better than your uncle's ambulance.
Well, it came cold. I think there's something wrong with me. I'm seeing double.
Nah, you're not seeing double. You're just in the head.
Oh, thank God.
I'm such a big fan!
Wait, now I am.
Gosh, the gamer cries. There's no passion in the video game industry these days. Unlike back then, all they do now is re-release the same game over and over again.
Let's talk.
How do we increase our profits?
It's called theft.
Or, you could just do what you're already doing. Again!
This is not helping my case.
Have you ever wondered why Pokemon games come in twos? I mean, it's something we're so used to at this point. It's strange when they don't. Two games releasing on the same day, but they're so damn similar. It's like they're each a different side of the same coin. Pokemon Red and Pokemon Blue. What's the difference between them?
I don't know.
Turns out the real difference is that mine is better. Yes, the dual release. Some may call it an outdated strategy, but I won't say no to another method of size debate. So what's the point of this, and why don't they do it elsewhere? Well, see, if you release two different Pokemon games with minute differences, most people would just pick the one with the cover art they like the most. More diehards will pick the one they find to have the more compelling distinctions, and those who need help will buy both. One of the biggest reasonings behind doing a dual release is the two different versions of the game communicating in some way. So some things you can only get in Pokemon Red, well, if a Pokemon Blue player links up with a Pokemon Red player, you can trade to get those Red exclusives in your Blue. Thus, you create a sensation where players are incredibly defensive towards the version they picked, which encourages more discussion on the games, a deeper connection towards the series, and excuses.
Well, I picked Pokemon Blue because Red is too much for me to handle right now.
Pokemon is obviously the most iconic example of this strategy. You may know that, as it's the only example I've given. Not sure if this would have been a great opener. All of the traditional mainline Pokemon titles follow this format, starting with the launch of Pokemon Red and Green in 1996, only in Japan. Yeah, Red and Green. Odd choices for initial colors. Should have gone with Pokemon Orange and Light Pink. Later on, they released Pokemon Blue as an updated third version, which also became a Pokemon staple. Here in North America, we ended up just getting Red and Blue, which those colors are sworn enemies, making those the dual release over here encourage more debate amongst players of what color to get. Especially considering Pokemon was brand new here, the fact that certain elements were exclusive to each version didn't matter nearly as much. Yeah, Mankey's only in Pokemon Red.
Thank God I picked Blue.
So the entire point of Pokemon is to try and catch them all, get all the Pokemon. That tagline alone some kids up for life. It's on the box for each version, yet you can't catch them all in either one of these games. The only way is to have a friend with an alternate color, or the easier solution, buy another game. Ooh, don't forget a second Game Boy link cable. Believe me, this is what many actually do with every new Pokemon release. It really makes you think.
I should re-download Tinder.
This was meant to encourage players of Pokemon to interact with each other, like people. Now, did you really need to release the game as two separate but nearly identical versions? Well, let's be fair, that Game Boy link cable was really only ever utilized in a head-to-head multiplayer sort of deal. Pokemon was frankly pretty damn revolutionary for allowing you to swap the things you've collected in-game with another player, and to also keep said things on your cartridge. It was ingenious, something that really wasn't done before. And while you would still have incentive to do that if there was just one Pokemon game available, having two made it 100% necessary to link up and trade in order to get everything. Also, it just fit the Pokemon series, getting to pick your starter Pokemon at the beginning, just after getting to pick your favorite color, stone, letter, and Pokemon Red and Blue, plus Green in Japan, really did a lot for these letters. Well, not in that order. Do you ever see when something is popular, others copy it, but they copy the wrong thing? Like, oh, Pokemon just hit it big, and why is that? Two games, colors,
oh, and negligence.
So many series have attempted the dual release. I mean, hey, if Pokemon does it, why can't Bomberman?
There are laws, you know.
Now, Nintendo themselves, they tried applying this format to some of their other franchises, most notably The Legend of Zelda, with the games Oracle of Seasons and Oracle of Ages. Two games released right alongside each other that would connect, though unlike Pokemon, these are both different games. They may be cut from the same cloth and have numerous shared elements, but playing one Oracle game does not mean you played the other. These games fundamentally construct a two-parter, though the order order in which you play them doesn't matter. Beating one gives you a code to enter in the other to continue on and get the full experience. It isn't like how in Pokemon games the only difference is I'm wearing a hat this time. No, this is a very unique and cool take on the dual release format. It doesn't feel like they're trying to piggyback on Pokemon's success, rather put their own spin on having two games released at the same time. It showed that if Nintendo was going to do more dual releases, they weren't just gonna do something like different Pokemon in each game. They were gonna do it with dogs! Nintendogs on the Nintendo DS released in 3 variants at launch, each with different dog breeds to pick from. Which dog did you choose?
Squirtle.
Turns out Nintendo wanted this to feel like you were picking a dog from the pound, so initially the idea was to have 15 separate versions of Nintendogs for each breed on shelves at once. Thankfully, they narrowed it down to 3, with each variant just having different types of dogs at the start, with all the others from the separate versions unlockable later on, so there's really no need to buy all editions.
And yet, here we are!
Where?
Hell!
Nintendogs Best Friends would launch later on, that featured the most popular breeds available at the start, with, just like the others, the rest of them unlockable later, like the Pugs! So it's fundamentally a Nintendogs Greatest Hits that just gets worse as it goes on.
I don't like the Pugs.
Then Nintendogs Dalmatian and Friends release. Same deal as before, for a game with no necessary addition to have 5 versions, this game has 5 versions. And they did it all again with Nintendogs plus Cats on the Nintendo 3DS. Though they launched that with 3 and kept it to that number. I assume Nintendogs on the DS got so many additions due to the sheer popularity of it all, and on the 3DS, not so much. But that didn't stop Nintendo from attempting a multi-version release with another one of their franchises. In 2016, we got Fire Emblem Fates. Plural, 2 games, Fate's Birthright and Fate's Conquest. The gimmick of this game's story is that you're blood related to one family while having being raised by another, and these 2 families are at war with each other, so you have to decide who you fight alongside. A great concept for a story, no doubt, but I feel like they kind of squander that potential by releasing the game in this way. Your choice as to who to fight with is made via purchasing one game over another. Birthright is siding with the family you were born with, Conquest the family that raised you. So you expect me to make this decision without actually playing the game or knowing the characters? Wouldn't it make more sense to just make this a standard Fire Emblem game, and a few hours in, after the story kicks off and you get to know everybody, that's when you have to make your decision? A decision that's supposed to be this impactful moment you personally feel passionate about? A decision that the entire game's concept is based around? And you expect me to make it in a Target? Plus, both games are basically the exact same for the first few chapters until the player character makes their decision on who they side with a few hours in, which just emphasizes to me how this would feel so much better as a decision made in-game rather than in the store. That's not to say there isn't enough content in both Birthright and Conquest to warrant them being separate releases. No, I mean, they're both full games in their own right with different stories and scenarios. But in my opinion, they're only full games in their own right from like a checklist perspective. Like, oh, 30 hours each, unique plot lines, different scenarios, but you don't really get the same experience just playing one side of the story here. So like, yeah, it's not like this isn't a full game's worth of content, but that doesn't mean it isn't 1/3 of a full game at its core. Because there was a 3rd version release. This one was only available as downloadable content, Fire Emblem Fates Revelation, where you try to get both families to work together. And all 3 versions were bundled together on a single Nintendo 3DS cartridge, exclusively in the Fire Emblem Fates Special Edition. Yeah, this pretty much confirmed the split release was done more so for more sales rather than to enhance the experience in any way. I mean, they don't refer to Birthright, Conquest, and Revelation as 3 separate games, rather 3 paths. Hell, the back of the box calls it the complete version of Fire Emblem Fates, so it makes far more sense for everything to just be on one cartridge.
I don't make the rules, I just enable them.
For the most part though, Nintendo keeps this release strategy exclusive to Pokemon, because frankly, it's the only one that's really been proven to work. Hell, they even tried it with spin-offs. Pokemon Mystery Dungeon used to be a dual release, with the first entry having one on the Game Boy Advance and the other on the Nintendo DS. Red Rescue Team and Blue Rescue Team. You know, it's kinda cool how the box arts connect this way, but by themselves, like, what's selling you on this? Oh man, I always wanted Squirtle to look down. Most of the differences come down to Blue Rescue Team being on the DS, not how these games were designed around being separate releases. Touchscreen support, utilizing the dual screens, the DS screen aspect ratio is different, the music and graphics can be slightly different, and there are exclusive Pokemon to each version that you can unlock in the other version with a password. Why are these 2 separate games? It is pretty interesting how they're on separate handhelds, but that also makes it harder for them to interact with each other. Connecting 2 Game Boy Advances couldn't be simpler, same with 2 Nintendo DS's. I don't even know how to somebody, let alone make this work. So, Red Rescue Team players can connect to other Red Rescue Team players, the same with Blue Rescue Team players. You can connect Red Rescue Team to Blue Rescue Team by plugging the game into the DS's GBA slot, but you can't physically connect the DS game to the GBA game, so if you want to do that, you have to use passwords to trade version-exclusive Pokemon, which you can just look up online. Can't really blame them for the lack of communication between the two games, as being on two different systems will do that to you. But this feels like they were making this game for the Game Boy Advance when, damn it, put it on the DS for a multi-platform release, but decided to be cute and they gave each version a unique twist. They also crucified my productivity for the past 3 minutes. Mystery Dungeon continued to receive dual releases until Gates to Infinity on the 3DS, which was just one standard game. Then when Red and Blue Rescue Team were remade on the Nintendo Switch, they were combined to just be one title, Rescue Team DX. That's what happens with a lot of series. They try this out until eventually giving up and going back to what worked originally. Case in point, Yokai Watch, one of the biggest games on the Nintendo 3DS. It took Japan by storm in ways not seen since Pokemon's debut, which was just the beginning of the comparisons between the two franchises. I mean, both are RPGs, both are about kids collecting and befriending unique monsters, both launched a huge line of merchandise, anime, movies, manga, spin-offs, so really, what's more similarity gonna do? While Yokai Watch was just one game, Yokai Watch 2 released similarly to any other Pokemon game. 2 titles. I can just imagine all the kids on the playground debating, what do you prefer, bony spirits or fleshy souls? Neither! The differences are like any other Pokemon game. Version exclusive yokai in each one, plus they eventually did a third version, much like Pokemon. They used the dual release tactic again for the spin-off Yokai Watch Blasters and Yokai Watch 3, but only in Japan, as when the game was localized, they just released one game. You know, that's probably due to a number of different things. The series was suffering from a decline in popularity alongside the game launching in North America in 2019 on the Nintendo 3DS. That's damn creepy. So like, why put out 2 versions of the same game for a handheld and fundamentally its last year of relevancy in a series that was also fundamentally in its last year of relevancy? I assume Nintendo, who published it outside of Japan, said the same thing and took the third version of the game and just localized that. Yes, third version. As I've already discussed, that's oddly enough a common theme with dual releases. You put out 2 versions at the same time, then sometime later, you put out a third as the definitive release. After Pokemon Red and Blue came Pokemon Yellow, which has a couple gameplay, story, and graphical tweaks, which is what most of these versions consist of. Third versions would often follow each Pokemon game, and then we got Pokemon Black and White. Obviously, the third one's gonna be Pokemon Gray. But then they thought, well, why not make the third version's dual releases themselves? Bam! Pokemon Black 2 and White 2. To be fair, these are full-blown sequels to Black and White, not just better versions of them. So sure, doing this makes sense. But hey, Pokemon X and Y released? Surely there'll be a third version titled Pokemon Z. I mean, no, they made a follow-up to the anime based on Pokemon X and Y titled Pokemon XYZ. Surely this is gonna happen.
Don't give your hopes up.
Instead, we just got a flat-out new set of Pokemon games 3 years later, Pokemon Sun and Moon. Now, those included special moves you could perform called Z moves. Okay, well, now you're just teasing me. After Sun and Moon, rumors spread about a third version titled Pokemon Stars on the Nintendo Switch. Instead, we got Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon on the 3DS 1 year after Sun and Moon, enhanced with some alterations from the originals, just like most third versions of Pokemon before. It's just now they found a way to turn that third version into a dual release in of itself. I mean, they remade Pokemon Yellow for Nintendo Switch and turned it into Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. They turned the third version of a dual release that was meant to be just one game into 2 games. Who knows what else they're capable of?
Dual releases are interesting when you analyze them, especially when you realize they mainly only ever worked for Pokemon. Because there's a slew of other games that attempted the same damn thing and they all flopped because what did they do? Exist.
Austin Powers, Oh Behave, or Austin Powers, Welcome to My Underground Lair.
Oh man, should I breathe or hydrate?
These games are fundamentally simulations of each Austin Powers character's computers with a few minigames available within. For the time, some of this can be a bit novel, like how there are video clips from the movies and how a very limited parody of Windows is in your pocket at all times. After you make room. But when it comes down to the gameplay, it's just minigames that are only slightly different across both titles. Like, have you ever dreamed of what the extreme differences would be like between Austin Powers and Dr. Evil playing rock, paper, scissors? I am so sorry. What, Othello? Pac-Man? The only game that's different across both titles is the final one. In Oh Behave, you get a platformer, and in Underground Lair, you get a reskin of another Game Boy Color game by the same developer, Evil Knievel. Looking on the back of the box is 4 of them? They were planning 4 of these games? Who else would they have based them on? This fucking guy? Everything about this feels forced.
No.
I feel like they only had 3 months to make an Austin Powers game, and they wanted to do a multi-game release at the height of Pokemon's success because as much as I like Machop, I always wished he was Dr. Evil instead. Doing a dual release not only shows the intention by the publisher to just ride the coattails of another game series success without riding the right coattails, but doing a minigame collection like this shows they wanted to make money and fast. You can't tell me this wasn't done because it wasn't the easiest way to get a game out. Case in point, Crash Purple and Spyro Orange for the Game Boy Advance. A crossover between Crash Bandicoot and Spyro, where this is a Crash game with Spyro's main antagonist as the enemy, and this is a Spyro game with Crash's main antagonist as the enemy? And Fungus? Honestly, that's a really cool idea and a great concept and reason behind making this a dual release.
So why does this still elicit fear?
This is a minigame collection disguised as a platformer. You run and jump around these levels where your goal is to find portals to play the minigames. That's all this damn thing is, just a bunch of random minigames stitched together through basic-ass 2D platforming hub worlds because, guess what? That's easier and quicker to produce than actual platforming levels. So instead of making a legitimately gripping and awesome crossover between 2 legendary franchises that have always been close to each other ever since their debut on the PlayStation, we got games created just to have appealing box art for toddlers. Oh mom, I picked Spyro Orange. Why?
Because why did you pick Dad?
Bomberman delved into this release strategy with the Bomberman Max games. One you play as Bomberman, the other you play as Max. Who the hell would pick that one? Want to play a Bomberman game? Yeah, on one condition. I don't want to play Bomberman. But the character that dove headfirst into this shtick was Mega Man with the Battle Network series. I mean, the first 2 games here, no problem, standard ass titles. Then starting with Battle Network 3, wow, it's almost like there's 8 games.
Close. 9.
Like, my lord, this was a lot. Even without the dual releases. 6 games on 1 console? Yeah, but still. Then Battle Network was followed by the Star Force series, and that consisted of 3 games spread across 7 in total. Now, of course, considering these all to be separate games is hyperbolizing things a bit, I do agree. Except when Capcom puts all the Battle Network games in a collection, they say all 10 Battle Network games and count the dual releases as individual games. Man, I'd love to talk about the differences between each of the Battle Networks here, but after researching it, as somebody who's never experienced this series past the first entry, this is all gibberish to me so far. That's the problem. How is there not an immediate official resource on what's different in all these games most of the time? How do you expect me to pick between them? Thankfully, some games make it pretty easy. The game Nier released here in North America as just that, Nier. But in Japan, it launched as Nier Gestalt on Xbox 360 and Nier Replicant on PlayStation 3. The idea was that both consoles got basically the same game, but with different playable protagonists, with Replicant having a younger character and Gestalt having an older one. Other than that, they're basically the same game, so while I think it's a creative release, it's kind of pointless, especially considering they released on different platforms. I mean, that's still pretty cool, but most people only have one console or the other, and in Japan, most people only have one console, or dear God, anything but an Xbox 360. So the element of the dual release, being choosing which version you want, isn't as prevalent here, as most people just get whatever released on the console they own. When it came to North America, they just brought over Gestalt and released that on PS3 as well, though Replicant did finally make its way over here in the form of a remaster for PS4 and Xbox One, and they still find a way to confuse the hell out of me. Doesn't take much though. You know, the whole Nier situation reminds me of something.
That I'm going to die one day.
These Zelda CDI games, Link the Faces of Evil and Zelda Wand of Gamelon, are dual releases. Some of the earliest to be exact. Back in 1993, these launched on the same day and share gameplay mechanics, presentation, the works. Which one would you pick? That one.
Outside of Pokemon, it seems that dual releases have died down considerably, and for good reason. Because why? This always felt like it was done for marketing and monetary purposes rather than to enhance the gameplay, because in the end, I feel like most of these launch strategies ended up blowing up in these companies' faces. But hey, we're starting to stray further and further from the traditional Pokemon format, because there are so many more forms these games can take.
Can you say hey all Scott here? My therapist never recommended me to do any of this.
Why would I waste a Hail Scott here on that?
Cause I'm scared what's gonna happen.
It's just Sonic Boom.
And Genghis Khan was just a fucking die!
You have the different games on different consoles in the same series on the same day. Assassin's Creed Unity and Assassin's Creed Rogue, Sonic the Hedgehog and Sonic the Hedgehog Genesis, Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric and Shattered Crystal. Man, this is not going well today. Looney Tunes Acme Arsenal and Looney Tunes Duck Amuck. These have absolutely nothing to do with each other, but they gave them similar box art and released them on the same day. Is there any benefit to releasing these games on the same day? I feel like putting 2 Assassin's Creeds out at the same time makes it less likely somebody's gonna pick up both. If you release them like a month apart, that would give the player time to beat one and move on to the next, or save up their money to buy the next. And the gall of Sega to release 2 games called Sonic the Hedgehog on the same day. Sonic Boom would always advertise itself as a game coming to both Wii U and 3DS, and when it launched, they were 2 completely different titles. I don't get it, man. I do think staggering releases can be good for games like these, so players don't have to make a choice. But since these games are each on different platforms, they may be done so those with the handheld or the last generation systems don't feel left out on the big new game's release date. Oh, thank God. But when they put out 2 volumes of a game that should just be 1 full one on the same day, like, man, Atari Flashback Classics Volume 1 and 2 on PS4 released on the same day. Don't even try to defend that. You couldn't put everything in one package? The same with Mega Man X Legacy Collection. Like, come on, guys. You just overcomplicate this stuff. In some ways, this is more complicated than the traditional Pokemon like dual release. Or with that, it's not as much about having to buy 2 games to get the full experience. It's just about making the choice yourself.
Either way, I'm in hell.